And so from this point onwards, we'd like to invite 3 members from Japan as panel members. We have Mr. Shin Kodama, who is from the Iwaki Artistic Culture Hall, Alios, and he's also a producer from a group called Chigi Sozo or JAFFRA. And we also have Mr. Shinji Matsumoto. He is the managing director from the Sendai Philharmonic Orchestra. He is also the head of the performance business department. And we have from Suntory Hall, Ms. Kazumi Minoguchi, who is the programming director. So the 3 panel members will be joining Ms. Kathryn McDowell for panel discussion. And I'd like to first of all invite each of the panel members, the 3 Japanese members, to give us a short discussion, and then we will get on with the panel discussion. So may I ask first of all Mr. Kodama to step up to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Kodama of JAFFRA. I'm also involved in a place called Iwaki, which is in Fukushima Prefecture in the Tohoku region. There's a cultural center there called Alios, and I'm working as producer for that place as well. 4 years ago, LSO came and gave a concert at Alios Hall, I remember. And we have that connection, but I'm not given that much time, so I'm going to give you a very, very simple introduction, which is probably going to be information that you're already quite familiar with, about JAFFRA and also about Iwaki, the city. But you know, after hearing about the LSO, what struck me most was the fact that there's always going to be a limit to how much funds you have available. But I think that you don't have any limits to what you think the possibilities are. So mentally, you don't have any ceiling. When we do our sort of work, you know, we tend to confine ourselves depending on how much funds happen to be available. And we manage to discourage ourselves before we even set out to do something. And so that's something that I really brought away from this talk. So now about JAFFRA, the Japan Foundation for Regional Art Activities. This was set up by the Home Office at the time, where the local governments were supposed to start setting up locations which would be centers for cultural activities. So we saw this entire wave of construction and opening up going around the country, where all sorts of local authorities started creating their own institutions. There are more than 2,000 something hundred. The usual way in which they are described in Japan is that you just have the box and you don't have any content to put inside the box. In other words, the building drove the project, and then we are faced with a question, the quandary of what to do with the marvelous new building that we have, which is perhaps a phenomenon that is not just limited to Japan, but which is one of the outstanding characteristics of how we pursued cultural policy. We tend to go after the entire structure or the apparatus first. So after much thought, we began to feel that we should also start thinking about what to put inside those buildings. The software as opposed to the hardware side. In 1994, this organization, Japan Foundation for Regional Art Activities, JAFFRA for short, was established. There is an agency for cultural affairs in Japan, but the institution which established this was actually the ministry which is in charge of local government and all sorts of other policy issues such as such as telecommunications as well. So the angle that was brought to JAFFRA was to look at regional art activities as a way of stimulating and invigorating the regions. So from the very early days, JAFFRA was placed in a situation where we have always felt that it was important to build contacts and ties with the local communities. That's always been an integral part of how we have worked, and our activities are very wide-ranging. I think you already can see that we cover all sorts of things, from the visual arts to performing arts, dance, theatre, and music. But as we have the Alios here, I'm going to be focusing on music. Now, 4 years after JAFFRA was created, from fiscal year 1998, JAFFRA has collaborated with many different halls, publicly run concert halls around the country, to look at music as a way of stimulating these places. Everybody agrees that classical music is fantastic. It's a very good thing. So while we all agree that classical music is outstanding, people for some reason don't turn up at concerts. This is something that we've been seeing all over the country, and it's a very sad situation, and we wanted to do something about it. So we decided that just sulking in our halls wasn't going to be enough. We should actually try to go outside of our concert halls. But ever since JAFFRA was created, the JAFFRA focus has been on supporting the institution of the concert hall, not the individual artist. So the concert hall had to go out into the community together with the artist as the basis for our programs. It might sound as something which is just common sense, but in those days it was revolutionary, because concert halls expected people to turn up on their doorstep. They did not actually think of concert hall staff as going out into the community. Usually they would go out armed with tickets. Otherwise, it was very rare for staff of concert halls to actually to go outside into the local communities. But the starting point was to create these programs where we started looking at publicly run concert halls and music as a way of bringing out greater vitality. And we also combined that with concerts and outreach activities. And there's a table that I put together last night. I'm not quite sure if the figures are accurate, but apparently, up to March of this year, in the past 15 years, we've been able to see activities in close to 350 community centers. That's about 15% of all of the publicly supported halls and institutions in Japan. Again, this also includes multiple visits, so this would just be the total number of places where activities have taken place. And what's important here, of course, is continuing this as a repeated process. So continuing this activity is crucial. Public funding is also important to ensure that this program will continue. And ultimately, more than 50% of the halls which have experienced these programs have gone on to continue outreach activities. That's the feedback that we have received so far. So in the past 15 years of experience, we feel that what's important is, and that in the early days, going out in the community was valuable in itself, because it was so unusual. Nobody had done it before. And so going out into the community was regarded as something which was important. But after this involvement, just going out into the communities was no longer going to be enough. We also had to think of what we were doing there and what we were sharing with the community, because that becomes very, very important. And with that awareness, we needed to create a system that went beyond simply sending people out into the community. We also needed directors and artists who are involved in these activities and who are also able to hone their skills and their expertise regarding these activities. That, I think, is an issue that we need to resolve for the future, because this is going to be a very important integral part of JAFFRA's future as well. Ever since JAFFRA was started up, this activity, Onkatsu for short, which is the outreach program, was very much aware of the fact that this was an activity where the artists were already being led by the producers. This is something which perhaps is peculiar to Japan, because you see, the producers started this activity before the artists became aware, the players became aware of how important this could be. This might be something which is different in Japan compared to other countries. And that also meant that coordination and linking the community together with artists were crucial elements of conducting these programs. When we started up this activity, we learned from the American examples, and in the case of the United States, going out into the community was regarded as the real achievement, and they weren't that good, I think, in providing detailed follow-up or coordination, which doesn't seem to be quite right for our situation, which is why we began a number of training programs which are a part of this activity, where we use music as a way of vitalizing this connection with the communities. And this is very much on-the-job training, because this isn't part of what they were taught, what musicians have been learning in the schools, for example. And another thing which we thought was extremely important was that in the case of Japan, you usually have the pupils gather together in the auditorium, which is usually the place where they run around and used for the gymnasium. So a whole group of people are gathered together and they are supposed to listen to music. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but we decided that rather than having as many people as possible, we are going to be looking at the impact on the listeners. And then we came to a conclusion that doing concerts in a big place was not going to be the best choice. So we thought about small groups of people, small places, and small mini concerts, in other words, short concerts. So starting on a modest scale was another of the basic principles which has continued to drive our outreach programs. And I think I've used up my time now, but this, I think, has given you a brief overview of the past 15 years of JAFFRA's activities relating to music and the community. The number of children, the moment I said small audiences, I think you've already guessed that the total number of children who've been experiencing these activities isn't really going to be that meaningful. I think the number of outreach programs, the number of occasions where outreach has been carried out is probably important. There is a table, which is all in Japanese, I'm afraid. But this shows you what the sort of thing that we do. After the short concert, we also do a clinic, as it were, where we give advice to the children. It's like a workshop. That's improvisation, the pianist can improvise. So the children draw pictures and they show the pictures, and that leads to improvisation so they can see how the pictures can inspire music. This is part of our activities. This is for classical Japanese music, traditional Japanese music rather. It's very rare for the Japanese to actually see traditional Japanese musical instruments. This is from utai, which is the sort of accompaniment that you get with kabuki and other traditional performances as well, which children are trying to sing along to. This pianist went to a small town in Kyushu, and this school didn't have enough pupils to continue to survive, so the school was going to be closed down. So what they did was that they gathered together all the messages from the children and created a song, which was then performed together with children who were going to be the last pupils to study at this school. And of course, you can imagine everybody was in tears. This is the table that I was talking about. There's a hard copy of the table in front of you, I think. We've had 2,472 outreach events over the past 15 years. Of course, the number per year isn't that large, but 15 years gives you quite an impressive total, I think. And I know I'm not running out of time, but I would like to talk about Iwaki. 2006, I was asked to take over the direction for the new institution which had been created in Iwaki. And the things that went through my mind, again, were focusing on the community. The building was completed in 2007. There's a 1,700-seat concert hall and a 200-seat smaller concert hall and 2 theaters which seat 500 and 200. The total population of Iwaki is about 350,000, so it's a gigantic place. But Iwaki is not that developed so far, and it didn't have that much concerning the arts up to that point, so it was very difficult to envisage this place being used 100% for the arts. So while we did call it the Arts Center, we decided this should be an arts center which is going to be focusing on supporting the everyday activities, the everyday for the citizens. So we do concerts, we'd also do outreach programs, we'd also explore opportunities to bring in other forms of art, or the arts rather, which were not part of the traditional performing arts or of music. Iwaki, you see, is a gigantic place. So even if there are some marvelous facilities in the central part of the city, because of the size of this place, the Japanese side says it's 40 kilometers by 30 kilometers, which makes it very large. So for some citizens, it's very difficult to go to the center. So we decided that we should actually go to the places which would find it difficult to come to the Alios Center. We also knew it was important to introduce outstanding artistic experiences. So in 2007, we had the LSO, and we're working together with the NHK Orchestra right now to carry out regular concerts. We also work with the community. Community activities can be understood in various ways. One aspect is to do outreach for people who cannot come to the Alios Center, to carry out outreach and education dissemination activities. Also, the local community is experiencing dramatic changes, as you can imagine, because the urbanization has been progressing so fast. when you go to the mountainous areas, you find that there are small communities which are almost on the brink of extinction because the younger people have all moved away and the only people living there are old-age pensioners. So just going and performing is not going to be enough. There are places where the neighborhood is already disintegrating because there aren't enough people. We think about how the art can provide us with an opportunity to link people together. In effect, we're thinking about art being a tool to bring people together, which is very difficult. And that's how we have the idea of Odekake Alios, where you have Alios delivered to your doorstep. Odekake Alios is a phrase that I think everybody in Iwaki knows about. We've been active for 5 years. Odekake is the Japanese phrase for dressing up and going out, or going out and paying a visit. And it's also going out to schools and also for people who work for special needs organizations and also for communities as well. But again, the crucial element here is to make very careful preparation and to make sure that we pay attention to all the details. And because of the restrictions of the budget and also of manpower, of course, we do feel that there is still much room for improvement. From next year, we do feel that we're going to be able to focus on younger people and on children, or to emphasize the younger generation more compared to the past. This is an example of a program that's Midori Tamura, who's showing the children what the piano looks like inside by using a musical box. A music box is used in order to explain how the piano works. So the children are just astonished by the fact that they can understand how the piano makes its sounds. Also, there are many artists who have ties to Iwaki, and we have local artists take part in training programs to take part in these schools programs. And this looks adorable. It's one of those miniature violins, 1/8 of the normal size. And what the artist is doing is that she's talking about how she started, and then after she's explained how she learned, then she's going to actually demonstrate how this violin could be played. So this is a way in which relationships are being built with local artists, which is something we've been exploring quite recently. I'm sorry I've just given you a very brief explanation, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kodama, for your input. And then we have from Mr. Matsumoto from Sendai Philharmonic Orchestra. And I understand that Mr. Matsumoto will be speaking to us about the experience of the Sendai Philharmonic Orchestra in the aftermath of the devastating earthquake last year. Good evening. Thank you very much for your introduction. My name is Matsumoto. I'm from the Sendai Philharmonic Orchestra. And so if I were to try to relate to Ms. McDowell's talk, I think that in Sendai we have about 120 performances, and 1/4 of these are programs that we conduct in the schools. And so it's already been about 20 years where we have been involved with the Sendai Junior Orchestra. So we have been providing guidance and instructions to the youth orchestra. So I know time is very limited today, so let me give you an idea of the kind of activities that we were involved in last year after the great earthquake last year. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak to such a large number of people. And I would also like to extend my gratitude to everyone for the support that they have given us, including such support from the overseas orchestras to us. Perhaps you know that on the day of the earthquake, we were planning to have a concert so that most of the musicians were already in the concert hall. Now, we did not incur much damage to the hall, and every one of the orchestra were all safe. Our instruments were all safe as well. However, in case of the orchestra concert, there are certain members who were not planned to take part in the concert that evening, so that it took us about 4 days until we could ascertain the safety of all of our orchestra members. And so in Sendai, most of the crucial services, infrastructure were stopped. However, in case of our orchestra, we were able to have a water service from the first day, and we also had power starting the next day. And while many people had lost any means of communication, we saw that many of our orchestra members gathered together to the hall with the rice cookers and their portable phones or her cell phones to our secretariat office. So in the beginning, the discussion was how do we secure food for ourselves? How do we find places to live? I myself had to spend 2 days at the evacuation center shelter, and after that I had to stay and sleep at our office for several days afterwards. But then after several days, the orchestra members who were gathered to cook for us started talking about opportunities of presenting music to the people in the city. But of course, we had doubts as to whether we should be playing music at a time like this, or whether we would have anyone interested in coming to such concerts. And the next question was, do we have any place where we can perform? And after about 1 week, things began to settle down somewhat. And so that it gave us an opportunity to think about what we could do for the people. And music was, in fact, the only thing that we were able to offer. And so we started planning for a center for providing restoration through music. And many of the musicians also started seeking ways of offering assistance and help to the people. And I believe I have distributed small pamphlets to you. But we started our performance 2 weeks after the earthquake. And the first thing that we did was our deputy director was also a Buddhist priest. And so we thought that maybe that we could have a concert in the temple that he had. But we decided to use a ballet studio, which is built alongside the temple, and that was where we decided should be the venue for our concert. However, at a time when there were communication media were almost all lost, we weren't sure how we could then communicate to the people as to the fact that we were holding this concert. There were still many aftershocks after the earthquake, and we were very concerned as to whether we are going to have any concert audience. And the size of the ballet studio was large enough for maybe 50 people in the audience, because we also needed space for the musicians. But 100 people or so turned up for this concert. It was full. And after the concert, we all decided that we will sing a song called Furusato, which is a traditional Japanese song with a sentimental song about your birthplace or your homeland. And we saw that everyone was crying as they were singing this song. but we realized once again that we are able to bring about such emotions to the audience. And the audience also appreciated the fact that for the first time, this gave them an opportunity to really shed tears and to show their sadness. So initially, it was very difficult to find venues for the concerts. So we decided that we would go out to the local communities and hold concerts in these areas. And so from the Center for Restoration Through Music, we offered the following three things. Or we asked for some assistance. We asked her for some funding, and we also sought out people to volunteer for the operation of these concerts. And the third point that we asked her was whether they knew of venues where we could perform, or whether they knew of groups who would like to have us come to perform. And so we started out by having concerts in public places. Very close to the Sendai station, there is a building, commercial building, where they offered us the first floor space for concert. Or there was an instrument store in Sendai, which they also offered for our concert. And there is a building called Trust City in Sendai, and the entrance lobby was also offered as a venue for her concert. And so in these places, we started providing or offering ensemble concerts. And there is one high school in Sendai which has a music department, and we have found out that their music hall was safe without any damages. And so using this hall, we were able to have almost a full orchestra. So the size of the hall and the stage was such that we could perform Beethoven symphonies, for example. So that was where we started offering full orchestra concerts. And after a month or so, we also started performing in evacuation shelters. And so this is how we organized our concerts in public places because it brought about solace to the citizens of Sendai. And when we went out to the evacuation shelters, we made sure that we paid a visit before the planned concert date to see the age group of the refugees in these shelters to figure out what would be the best programming for the kind of people who were there at the shelters. And all of us, even the musicians, had suffered some level of damage to ourselves. And so we tried to create a programming which will allow us to support our fellow citizens who had also incurred damages. So in our previous experience in offering concerts, I think there was a very clear line between the performers and the audience. However, because we were all affected by the earthquake, I think there was a bond between the performers and the audience. And so that united the musicians with the audience in a manner which we had not experienced in the past before the tragedy. And the musicians were also involved very much in the playing as well, perhaps much more than they had been in the past. When we went to the shelters, each family had sectioned off their little cubicles with cardboard boxes. but it was the children who would come out front to listen to the concert. But we could also feel that the people who were in the evacuation centers had been listening to our music, even if they were hidden behind these cardboard boxes.
And so we started from the 26th of March last year, and we had 235 concerts up to the end of March, the 31st of March of this year. Out of that total, 24 concerts were given by orchestras, and we were able to dispatch some of our members, some of our players, to different orchestras in about 13 different occasions, and we had 198 chamber music concerts. Concerning the chamber music, we had a total of 1,118 people who listened to the concerts, who participated, and we also did correction. The number of 1,118 was the number of participants, and we had 452 people who extended support by getting cooperation from choruses and chorus members and so forth. And the overall framework for these concerts, which were performed in order to help in the reconstruction process, can be identified as the events which were organized to help to console and to give some solace to the people. And we also had these activities which were supposed to show how Sendai was still very much alive, and we were still full of energy. We also went to Fukushima Prefecture, a place called Shinji or Ishinomaki or Ofunato, which are cities which were heavily devastated. We've also gone to the makeshift homes which have been created for the evacuees to live in. There are a number of different types of housing made available, and one of the problems that people are facing is that after they've been moved out of the evacuation centers, they've been placed into these housing projects which have been created as a sort of a stopgap measure for about 3 to 4 years, where they have no connection with the inhabitants. So delivering music to these people has helped to build a sense of community. Out of the chamber music type, smaller performances, there were 27 elementary schools that we visited. There are some schools which we visited twice, 9 junior high schools, that's 13 to about 15-year-olds, and also to hospitals and community centers, total 31 locations, and 16, that's 16 evacuation centers. And through these activities, we have been able to really become more aware of how important that moment when we are involved in music happens to be. We've also become very aware of the fact that there is a social aspect and ambition for music. Also, we have become much closer to the community, emotionally speaking, and also in the way in which we interact with our audiences. And next year, we are going to be celebrating our 40th anniversary. We do feel that we have been able to spread more of our roots out into the community, so there's more of that awareness. And one of the surprising bonuses, actually, is that we've got more people turning up to our concerts. From July of last year, we resumed our regular concerts, and there's been 1,000 extra people in total, looking at the number of people who've come to our concerts. And Kodama-san didn't mention this, but Iwaki, the Alios Hall, has always had a New Year concert in January, ever since it was opened. And because it has such a gigantic hall, They usually just opened the first 2 stories of the concert hall. 60% of the seats being filled would be a very good year. But this year's New York concert, Morioka, Fukushima, and Iwaki all saw that about 90% of the seats were taken. So we do feel that there's more of an awareness about our responsibility to society, and we also hope to be able to contribute to the process of reconstruction. And this activity that we have been doing together with that center, which focuses on the power of music to help in reconstruction, is something that we are aware of as long-term involvement. We also do believe that we should clarify our roles, and the center is preparing to file for formal status as a foundation. And I do hope that you look at the pamphlet, with photographs, which will help you to see some more details about what we are doing. And thank you very much indeed for the very interesting presentations. And we do apologize, but we do know that you all have so many things you need to talk about, but we don't have that much time, so we would like to apologize and to go on with no further ado to the last speaker, who's going to be talking about the Suntory Hall.
So I hope that she'll be able to present to us about the various projects that you have ongoing at Suntory. So my name is Minoguchi from Suntory Hall. And Mr. Kodama spoke for 20 minutes, so that means that leaves me no time for my presentation. And as Ms. Kathryn mentioned, and let me be very candid and frank in telling you what I had felt listening to her, Kathryn. And I think we have here in our audience the people who are very much involved in Japanese arts management circles. And I think you will probably understand what I'm trying to say. And I think that the programs which Ms. McDowell has presented, I think they have all been practiced in Japan. We have outreach program, we have people going out to the schools, we have workshops at elementary schools, we provide instruction for brass bands. I think all the arts organizations in Japan have all tried one or the other of these programs. However, why is it that we don't have that kind of solidarity that you have at LSO? Now, I know this word integrated was flying in front of my eyes, but the fact that LSO, a single entity, is able to conduct all of these activities is something that I am very curious about. And as I understand that the British Council had contact me over Facebook as to what it is that we are lacking here in Japan. Now, we are probably doing things which could bring about some impact on the society, but we cannot realize that impact because we don't have a full bird's eye view. And because we are not doing this in Japan, we have this very strange character in Osaka, who is the mayor there, of trying to terminate one of the orchestras there. So why is it that we are not able to do what LSO is doing? Now, let me speak to you about what Suntory Hall is doing. And until I joined Suntory, I wasn't sure as to how Suntory is doing. And they seem to think that Suntory is there to invite the Vienna Philharmonic for concerts. But people have told me there are other things that they're doing. And I have been involved with the Suntory Hall since 2008. And I have also been working with JAFFRA or with Casal's Hall, or I have also been involved with the startup of the Daiichi Seimei Hall. And so I have been involved in many aspects of concertizing in Japan. So when I joined the hall in 2008, I felt myself as if I was an Alice in Wonderland, looking at what Suntory Hall had been doing. But let me try to summarize what Suntory has been doing for the past 25 years. And I think that will give you an idea of what Suntory is currently engaged in. And so when people who do not know what Suntory Hall is doing, that's probably the lack of public relations capabilities of our people at Suntory, other than the fact that we organize concerts. But Suntory Hall does have its own mission statement. Now, I think many people would say, well, I never knew that you had a mission statement. But it's very simple. We want to have as many people as possible enjoy the greatness of classical music. And these are in parentheses or in quotation marks because these are the words of Mr. Saji, who had established the Suntory Hall. And he was the one who was the person who created Suntory Hall. And so he wanted to convey the greatness of classical music to as many people as possible. And through her musical art, we wanted to provide some contribution to the improvement of the level of culture in the daily lives of the people. And this is what was prepared in 1986 at the time of the opening of Suntory Hall. This is our Suntory Hall's philosophy. And in the opening series, this was taken from the program book from the opening concert. And Mr. Hagimoto, who was the general producer of the opening series, mentioned these 9 points. And these apply not only to Suntory Hall, but what's important here is probably our mission statement. First, there is music, and music is the master of the whole. And the whole is a whole, and the whole has to be filled with beautiful music. And this was a whole specifically for classical music, and this should be an ideal space for recreating the music that has been composed. And so these are some of the lines that we have found from our mission statement. And currently we have these 3 objectives. First of all, we want to offer very high quality and creative concerts based on a very global view. And the second point, we are a manufacturer of alcoholic drinks, so we have to consider offering best hospitality to the visitors to the concert hall, and we always maintain a smile on our faces. And so it used to, I think this was the first time the idea of providing services to the audience was incorporated in the mission statement of a concert hall. And the third point of our activity philosophy is that we engage ourselves in education activities. And Mr. Tsumi is the head of the Suntory Hall, and these policies that have been outlined here for the next 25 years is what I call the Tsutsumi Doctrine. In other words, in 20 years' time, we can say, I remember that concert 20 years ago. And so we're hoping that we will be able to present our concerts, which will be so memorable that 20 years from the time you go to the concert, that you could still look back on that and remember the emotion that you felt. And so we have to bring about such emotional experience for the audience. So we have to create history together with the audience. Now, in the past, perhaps we were only concerned about working with the musicians. However, we want to create the next 25 years of history, not just with the musicians, but also with the audience. That's the first point of the Tsutsumi Doctrine. And the second point is that we want to be able to make contributions towards what he calls a human environment. When he says human environment, it is not just the environment surrounding the people, but it is an environment which will also offer some enriching experience for the hearts of the humans. And so these are the activity policies that have been outlined for Suntory Hall. So let me quickly go over the past history of Suntory Hall. Now, we already had projects for education from the initial stage of the hall. However, this was mostly for nurturing the next generation musicians. And so we've had master classes which were held by Isaac Stern in 1986. And we also had what was called the Opera Academy for providing concertant performance of operas. We also had a young musicians series choosing or selecting some very young musicians from abroad. This new artist series was started in 1989 and went on through 2002. And then we also had a project called Rainbow 21, and this was an arena for young music school students to have concerts in. However, the Rainbow 21 also added on the project for music hall and music management or concert management. And so we even created a competition which will provide education to the concert management people. And then we also wanted to have the use of the organ in the hall. Now, the previous concert halls in Tokyo did not have an organ. Now, NHK Hall does have an organ, but it is on the side of the hall. But we wanted to promote our organ because it was very rare that a concert hall would have such organs. So we had such a program for her trying to disseminate the organ music as well. And so in the initial stage, we had education to foster the next generation performers. And that was something that had been also promoted by Isaac Stern, who was engaged in the initial master courses that he conducted. Now, in 2004, we started what was called the Saji Keizo Junior Program Seats. And I think I will be presenting this later. But we have 6 seats in the hall, which has plates called Saji seats. And for programming, which we felt was appropriate for children, we would invite 3 pairs of the parent and her child to the concerts. And we also combined this with programs such as a backstage tour. So all of these were started in 2004. And in her program book from opening her series, composer Yasushi Akutagawa said that a good whole will nurture a good audience, and that is the role that Suntory Hall will need to play. Because a good whole will gather her good musicians and will foster good music and good audience. And so we decided that we needed to have an education program which would involve the audience. And this was a clear indication of the direction that we should be going in. In 2010, this was at the time of the 25th anniversary of Suntory Hall. So we were looking to what we should be doing in the next 25 years. And at that time, the key concept for us was enjoy music. And this proposal was made from those people who were engaged in education. Now, in Japan, I think if I ask you to look back to the music classes that you had in schools, I don't think any of them really enjoyed these music classes. Because music education as offered in the schools did not really talk about how to enjoy music, because you had to study music, you had to learn about music. And so for people who do not like classical music, they say, well, I don't understand music, I don't know anything about music. But music is not something that you have to know or study. Music is something that you have to enjoy. And that's what we at Suntory Hall would like to convey to our audience. So for the next 25 years, or at the time of this 25th anniversary, we decided that key concept for our hall should be enjoy music. And so instead of the education program, we changed the name of that program to Enjoy Music program. At the same time, we established a chamber music academy alongside our opera academy. And so these were combined as a Suntory Hall Academy. And so now we have this Enjoy Music program, which is one of the important pillars of the whole program. I also wanted to tell you more details about some of our programs, but here are some examples. Now we have very inexpensive children's program. For example, we have a partnership with Carnegie Hall for what is called Carnegie Kids, and with Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. And I understand WPH is the acronym for the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, or maybe in English it would be VPO, but for WPH is taken from the Vienna Philharmonica. So at Suntory Hall, we have the Young People's Program for the WPH concerts. And we also have 6 seats designated for the junior audience. And you'll see these plays with the name Keizo Saji attached are designated for 3 sets of parent and a child. And these are invited, these parent and child pairs are invited to the concert, and it is a very tough competition to secure these seats. And we also have program for the future musicians, for the young professional musicians. And we have always had these education program from the outset of Suntory Hall, but now we want to make this even a more important program. And we have had some excellent results from the Rainbow 21 program. I think many of the people in the audience are, in fact, graduates from the Rainbow 21 program. And then because we want to make our hall more open, we have the organ promenade concerts promoting the organ. This is a free concert offered once a month, and at the same time we offer backstage tours. And we also have an open house once a year. Where we open this for the people. And on 1st of April, we had 11,288 visitors for our open house. So these are the things that we have been doing at Suntory Hall. And I have some photographs. This is from the Carnegie Kids program. And so this is in the recital hall, blue whole rows where we have carpets on the floor so people could sit on the floor. Now, in 1986, we had a program by Isaac Stern, also by Yo-Yo Ma, and then we had Suntory Hall New Artist Series, where pianists such as Lugansky and also Fazil Sai, Freddie Kemp, they were all part of our program, who have now gone on to become very established musicians themselves. This is from the Opera Academy and the concert that is conducted every year. For the Chamber Music Academy, you can see Leon Fleischer in the middle. That's the backstage star tour and the organ promenade. And for open house, we have Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven join us in the open house program. On the right-hand side, we have some of the children and workshops in different locations within the hall. And we have this partnership program with Carnegie Hall from International Exchange. And in 2011, Suntory Hall became a public interest incorporated foundation. We're part of the Suntory Art Foundation. So we are now a non-profit organization. And I understand that we will now be having a panel discussion, and I'm sorry to have taken up so much of the time. But when we became part of a public interest incorporated foundation, it was the fact that we had been engaged in this education program was one reason why we have become such a corporation or incorporated foundation. And so when we speak of educational program, these are usually regarded as just an artistic program. But I don't believe that that is really the only only aspect that is looked for in being a public interest foundation. I think it's important that we nurture the audience so that they will be able to hone their sensitivity to the greatness of classical music. And we have been involved in various activities, which was sponsored by JAFFRA, for example, for invigorating the music programs. So we have been involved in many of the JAFFRA activities. And many of our young employees have joined in these activities. So I think the Chamber Music Academy really has been very active or have made contributions in fostering these young people. As I said, we want to make sure that our censors for this music will be honed by our activities. And so I do hope that we can have some discussions in the panel session.
Thank you very much indeed. We are running out of time, but I'd just like to ask you to give us 15 more minutes. So, Kathryn, Kodama-san, Minoguchi-san, Matsumoto-san, could you come to the chairs once again? And we know that you're all tremendously busy, and I do apologize, but we'd like to just extend the session by 15 minutes, a quarter of an hour. And Minoguchi-san has just proposed that we should look at the issue of the public aspect of the arts, which I think is really being the focus of debate in Japan in recent years. I think we'll have to restrict ourselves just to that topic. So I'd like to ask if you could speak about the issue of the public nature or the public contribution of the arts or the public aspect. Could you respond to what you've heard from the Japanese participants, Ms. McDowell? And perhaps we could also have some of the thoughts of the Japanese speakers about the issue of the public aspect, the public contribution, the public nature of the activities that we undertake in the field of the arts and culture. That's a question that she was talking about earlier. And of course, you are all professionals, and I do hope that you're going to be able to stay on, because we've got some refreshments prepared and we'd like to have a more informal opportunity for you to continue discussion. So could you respond to that question posed at the very end? Microphone, please. Mic, onegai itashimasu.
The extraordinary experience of the people in Sendai. I think this shows really the way in which music can touch people's lives in the most extreme circumstances, and also how the public responds when you talk about the increased audiences when you were eventually doing your full orchestra concerts. I think that's because people realized the orchestra was there in the time of real need and able to communicate through the small group activities in a way that perhaps cannot happen in the more conventional atmosphere of the concert hall.
I completely agree with your analysis. I think I'm sorry to take up time again, but for our orchestra, 40% of our operational costs are being supported by the city of Sendai, that's the local city government. And you can understand that recently we get phone calls, and there are some people who do say that it seems inappropriate to use tax revenue for activities like ours. But at the same time, we do feel that our players were able to recognize that they had a public role and a public mission that they could discharge. I think we became very much aware of that for the first time. Also, though we are aware of the financial constraints, where so much money and so much of our energy has to be channeled towards reconstruction, both at the city level and also the prefectural level, both governments have indicated they will sustain the funding that they have provided in previous years for our orchestra, which I think is proof of how they feel. About Fukushima, Iwaki City also required about 6 months, half a year, until we could repair our facilities to the point where we could resume our activities. It seems as if, though, we have more people coming to our events. We don't know how long this is going to continue, but it does seem as if, though, we have acquired a larger audience. It may be that there are more people who feel that there is a need, after all, for the arts, because Iwaki is, after all, on the brink of the area which is most heavily devastated. Fukushima, Miyagi Prefecture, compared with those communities, the difficulties that they had to experience and to go through as they pursued the arts, listening to their experiences, and also the center that Sendai was talking about, Suntory Holdings and Vienna Philharmonic have created a special foundation for the support of the reconstruction process. And what we're going to be doing is what we are discussing, actually, with the center that the gentleman from Sendai spoke about. The awareness that Sendai Philharmonic is necessary, the fact that there are people who really felt grateful for the fact that the orchestra is there, is probably the reason why you have not had to experience the budget cuts. Osaka has a populist politician who's notorious in Japan, who's been arguing that we don't need any orchestras in Osaka because who listens to classical music. And I wish that he could listen to that presentation, because when we have natural disasters of this scale, when we have events of this scale, it does, forgive me for saying this and putting this in such a way, give us an opportunity, which is very rare, to actually appreciate the impact. As Kathryn is speaking about this topic earlier, the fact that we can actually communicate in language that people will understand on their own terms and which can actually relate to all the people and which can engage the feelings. Personally, I don't like it when people talk about the efficacy or the impact or the importance of the arts. There are people who've actually been able to let loose of their emotions, because I've had my experience of grief, and sometimes there are times when music is the only way in which you can actually release your tension to the point where you actually feel that you can allow yourself to cry and show your emotions. So the issue is, how should we communicate that message? All sorts of organizations, the London Symphony Orchestra itself has spoken about the importance of the arts, the power of music. It's easy to speak about it, but the difficulty is, how do people listen to that or experience that, and how can they be convinced of the importance of music, which is, I think, something that the two performers have really shown us today. Because when the two players spoke about the importance of their work, while we also recognize the programs, we, I think, were reminded of the fact that we could actually relate to what they're speaking about, the excitement that the two gentlemen spoke about. We had that moment of empathy, which can only be created perhaps by the players, by the musicians themselves.
How do you think of it?
I agree. I think that the way that that we impact upon our audiences is actually only by using the language which we speak, the musical language, but in an incredibly profound way. That's actually often terribly simple, and there's a real problem, I think, in the delivery of great music, that it can actually very easily be very glib. It can be facile. It can be too fleeting, and that's not the quality of the music. It's the quality of the artists. And whilst we have wonderful buildings, we must continue to nurture great artistic talent, because when you're in the presence of those people, and I just sit at the back of the orchestra making sort of my little contribution, but when you're in the presence of great artists, when you're playing or when you're listening, it's absolutely obvious, and there is nobody I've ever met who's ever listened to the sort of music we're talking about with those people who isn't touched. So it isn't about sleek concert halls, and it isn't about white tie and tails or jeans or whatever you wear. It's about how you tell your story. And I think that's the hardest thing. That's the biggest challenge in the 21st century, to find people who actually still know how to touch other people's souls. I think that's a real problem.
We have another pianist, by the way, who is here. And I think I should ask for a comment. Over there. This is Midori Tamura. who's been involved in outreach activities for about 10 years. She's probably the most experienced in this field in Japan. Thank you very much indeed for a most enjoyable and informative session. I went to the Guildhall School and I lived in the UK for a decade or more. And in my experience, I think everybody started with my experiences back in the UK. The salon concerts, all the opportunities where we could actually be very close to the audience. I think that was really crucial in shaping my involvement in outreach, where you had people who really enjoyed wholeheartedly the musical experience. Being able to have an audience of that type is something that I really started questioning myself about. When I started wondering about the sort of music I should try to share, what could I do for children who don't really have that much opportunity to come into contact with music? And for people who don't have that much opportunity to come into contact with music, I think I had those opportunities through my experiences in the UK. Also, performers have to pursue their field. I always try to come as close as possible to what I think is the essence of music. I also have to think about what the audience is able to take away from that experience. Again, empathy and how we can share that moment of empathy, and the issue of the language of music. How can we develop those skills and the ability to communicate with that? That potential is something that I think we can really mine and discover through outreach and also through these opportunities where we can be in a very intimate and situation close to the audience. So our experiences being involved in outreach is, I think, really let us become freer. And we've also been able to reach out more to the younger generation. And we've been able to contribute. Also, we've been able to create liaisons and relationships with other artists. And I hope to be able to explore more opportunities so that I can continue to build those networks. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that comment, because I think having the artists and the musicians at the heart of these programs is absolutely essential. It has to come from the music and the desire to communicate in that way. And, we are not teachers, ever, but we bring something special. And in the early days, people thought that was maybe getting confused. But the important thing is that the young people or people of any age can actually hear the music with fresh ears in a different way, whatever the environment is that they're playing and performing in. And so I think so long as we have that right at the heart, the opportunity to hear the very finest music at close quarters, and the opportunity to get inside that music in whatever way the project allows, that is actually what remains as the secret.
So perhaps we could have some response from the floor as well. Maybe someone who would like to ask a question. We can perhaps take just one or two questions from the floor. My name is Miki from Triton Arts Network, and I have been coordinating outreach programs myself. I have a question for Ms. McDowell. So when you go out to the schools, how do you choose the schools that you go to? Now, the way I see it, these activities should be it will probably more effective in schools where there are problem children, for example, where some children may be delinquent, be caught by the police. And I think it would be more effective in her schools, such as that school where such a musical program will be more effective. However, the teachers are usually too concerned about policing their children, so that they're not interested in accepting such a program. So I think in order to do that, you would need a facilitator in the community, people from the community who know the issues involving these schools, and that they can then interface with the orchestras, for example, to generate these concerts. So I'd like to ask you about your view on these facilitators' roles.
I think in many cases, we are working with the local authorities and with the groups who actually decide which schools will be involved in what activity. We also have some programs where the schools apply to us directly to be involved. And so we work both systems. So it means that the schools that have an interest and are keen can come forward directly. But it also means that every school in an area can become involved. So where we have a relationship with a local authority, then we would like to think that we are reaching the most needy schools that are in that area, and that over a period of time, over a few years, we are gradually reaching all of the schools in that area. So it's very important that we are having that strategic partnership that exists over a long period, and then we are working with the partners in that local area to make sure that the input that we can bring is reaching as many young people as possible, but also in the most appropriate way.
Okay, so let's go to another question. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question? My name is Shinichiro Okabe, and thank you, Ms. McDowell, and also for the panel members for a very interesting and meaningful discussion. I have one question, and that is, so he spoke at the beginning about the activities of LSO, and you mentioned that about half of the activities, or maybe 1/3 of your activities, might be your overseas concerts and tours. And I understand Sendai Philharmonic also has excellent programs for your activities, and I know Sendai Philharmonic also goes on tours. Going back to the ages of Haydn or Mozart, all musicians were involved in conducting tours, and they would go out on concert tours. So when you are on tours, when you are in residency here, for example, overseas, how do you regard your contact with the people in the community in those areas? I remember you had a Prokofiev project at Suntory Hall, and we conducted a roundtable discussion with Maestro Gergiev. And so when you are in residence at a hall, then you can be involved in such activities. Or I remember also meeting you at a conference in Aix-en-Provence. So you do engage in such activities on your tour. And so I was wondering what kind of bond you have with the community when you go out on these tours. Do you have contact with the local government? Or could this community be regarded not just for a very small region, but you can think of the community in a much broader sense? Would that be a possible interpretation of your ties with the community?
I think it's very different in different places. And it's very important for us to listen to our local presenters and the people who are engaging us to be in the different places. So, for instance, you saw the work in Aix-en-Provence, and the brief at the outset in Aix was that they did not have a professional orchestra in residence. So they wanted to have a major discovery presence that we would build. And so we would go more than just for the residency itself. We would be there a number of times. And over the 4 years of the arrangement, then we would seek to do certain things with them. We would also play opera and we would also give concerts. But that's not the same as going to New York, say, where there are local orchestras, wonderful local orchestras. And in a way, it would be impertinent of us to assume that we should take all of those programs to New York, for instance. So we have to listen. And we are willing and open to bring some of this work. But we are not saying we must. We are your guest. And so we listen. And I think if we can work alongside a locally based orchestra, then that makes a lot of sense as well. And for instance, we do it in reverse. Last year, the Los Angeles Philharmonic came to London. And so we invited Gustavo Dudamel to make a workshop with our young people that you saw on the screen and our players as well as the Los Angeles Phil players. And that made sense for that situation. So I think we have to be sensitive to that. The most important thing for me is that each orchestra should take responsibility for its own community first and foremost, and seek to develop everything that it can, and seek to integrate. This was a word that came up before, to place this work right at the heart of its thinking, because only then can you think about the whole community that you are seeking to reach.
Well, the Sendai Philharmonic is one of those stay-at-home sort of orchestras. We don't actually get out that much. We really stay in Miyagi Prefecture. Once a year, we would go to places like Iwaki or Fukushima or Morioka. When we do go outside of the prefecture, we would tend to go as part of the schools programs, which is run by the Ministry of Education. But last year, we were invited to go to many different places. But in those occasions, we have a sponsor who usually indicates the sort of program that they'd like to hear. And if we are to organize our own program and to do a tour, for example, Ofunato, Ishinomaki, or Fukushima, in those cases, we don't just go and give a performance or performances. We also try to perform together with people who happen to be in those communities or those places and who are involved in music. So in Shinchimachi, we worked together with a high school band. In Ishinomaki, we worked together with musicians. Many of them were actually singers who were not able to perform because of the circumstances. Ofunato, we started through Beethoven's Ninth, because the chorus group, which was based in Ofunato, contacted us first. And so in Ofunato, in February of next year, we're going to be going and doing Beethoven's Ninth. So we're getting involved in that sort of activity. So, anybody with a very final question? Just one last question? No? Oh, great. And I'm sorry, that's the horrible thing about being an organizer. We have to spoil the fun, because we know that you're all having a very interesting discussion, and as with most of these cases, I'm afraid that I have to say that we have to wrap up discussion. And at the same time, I do think it's fair to just ask if you could just like to give us some final comments at the very end to wrap up. Kodama-san first, and Minoguchi-san, not Mizoguchi-san, and Matsumoto-san, and then Kathryn and McDowell at the very end. So just some final comments, please. Education is a word that the Japanese aren't very fond of. People tend to think it sounds rather overbearing. You know, somebody's going to teach you something. But education is, after all, a program to help people to grow up so that they can contribute and who can live meaningful lives. So when we have opportunities for children to listen to music, I always think that I hope that this will help them to enjoy music and to have marvelous lives. And if we're going to try to make that happen, then what is the experience that we want these children to have at this particular point in time? That's always what I think of when I design and put together the coordination programs. I always say this, I always speak to the players and also the facilitators about the importance of being aware of that. We have to ask ourselves that question. And I hope that people will always be involved in education programs with that particular perspective. Well, I just will keep on shouting out at the top of my voice that I want to make sure that people are going to enjoy music. The fact that that enjoyment is only brought to the table by the players. The musicians are the people who bring in the enjoyment element. I think some of the younger people who are here want to become involved in arts management. But when we think about arts management, it seems to be really managing things and organizing things from a bird's eye perspective. But when you actually work in real life, it's really a matter of how much fun you can have while you enjoy collaborating with the artists. How can you build a relationship of trust so that you feel that you are really all contributing to that joint effort? And again, as the Suntory Hall mission statement says, we are all serving the cause of music, because music is this marvelous thing that has been given us by God or by the gods, and we want to work together as equals in creating these marvelous experiences and opportunities. I think that's something that we've always thought about. The Suntory Hall is, after all, just a place. It's a box. It's a space. For the artists, up to now, they've been focusing on how to attract audiences. But now that we have the academy aspects, the Suntory Hall has become a place for fostering rising talent. And as we hope to nurture those talented young people, we also grow in that process, we learn from it, and we also hope that people will be able to continue to enjoy having marvelous lives. I'd just like to talk about two experiences. The first relates to the Agency of Cultural Affairs. Usually we have 20 school performances. We always wondered what on earth we were doing and what sort of legacy we were leaving behind after performing in those schools. But in fact, lots of schools that we visited sent us messages. They also provided whip-arounds, and they made donations to our funds, which made us feel that we had at least left some sort of memory in their minds. So they seemed to have good feelings about us. Also, in the evacuation centers, we tended to do performances after dinner. So sometimes people would shout out they were just falling asleep and they were annoyed. But then the same person shouted out that he enjoyed the performance and that he was grateful for the performance. So here again, music has allowed us to leave some sort of an impression behind or some sort of memory. So thank you for your attention and enjoyed this opportunity.
Thank you all. It's been really fascinating for me and I think for my colleagues to be with you. You have a wealth of activity already underway. I have to say you have the best halls in the world and we are envious. And we've been to a school today where we were so impressed by the discipline and the beauty of your young people and what they can achieve. But in thinking about this whole work, I feel there is a need to place it right at the heart of each organization's thinking. It's not something important but to the side. It has to inform everything that is done. And therefore you think about a wonderful performance, but you're also thinking about how that can be communicated to a whole different group of people. And so perhaps the emphasis goes a little bit more on people in general, not just the paying audience, and how that you can take the fantastic programs that everyone has and enable those to be enjoyed by many more people. And I think it's a challenge for the boards of the organization, for those people who are in the governance and those people who are leading the organizations, to think carefully about where this type of work sits within their organization and to work with the business community and the funding bodies to really see the totality of the picture and to enable all of you to be able to present these programs in the way that you would like.
So thank you very much. I'd like to thank the panel members for taking part in this program. Let's have another round of applause for our panel members.